She thought she had buried her past forever, until at a Texas wedding, her little boy ran toward a stranger in a wheelchair and called him Daddy. What happened next shattered everything she thought she knew about love, betrayal, and second chances. Before I begin the story, I'd like to say a quick prayer for you, my dear family. May your days be filled with peace, your heart with joy, and your steps guided by light. Amen. If you're happy to be here, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a story. The Texas sun beat down with a slow, relentless warmth, drenching the ranch in late afternoon gold. Long stretches of meadow rolled into the horizon, dotted with oak trees that stood like old guardians of memory and tradition. Horses flicked their tails lazily in the distance, while rows of folding chairs faced an arch laced with white roses and bluebonnets, the state flower of Texas. The sound of violins drifted over the crowd, soft and elegant, carrying with it that familiar hum of expectation. It was a wedding day, a day meant for love, promise, and new beginnings. But for Amelia Carter, the day carried a different weight. She arrived holding the small, delicate hand of her 6-year-old son, Ethan. He was bouncing slightly, as children often did when surrounded by the noise of laughter and music. His curly dark hair shone under the sunlight, his innocent brown eyes darting curiously from one guest to another. His suit was a little big on him, the sleeves threatening to swallow his wrists, but he looked proud, like a little man ready to play his part. Amelia wore a soft blue dress, modest but elegant, its flowing fabric catching the breeze. Her hair, a cascade of chestnut waves, was pulled back with a silver pin her mother had given her years ago. On her left hand, there was no ring, only the faint trace of where one used to be. She told herself she was here for the bride, her childhood friend who had begged her not to skip the occasion. She told herself it was just another wedding, just another evening. But the knot in her stomach betrayed her, because she hadn't expected him to be here. As she guided Ethan toward their seats, her eyes caught on a figure at the far end of the aisle, and her breath stopped. There he was, Alexander Hayes, her ex-husband, her first and only love, the man she had once vowed forever to. And he was sitting in a wheelchair. The sight hit her like a physical blow. Alexander, the man who once strode into rooms with the kind of confidence that made walls bend and people listen, now sat lowered, his tall frame folded into steel and leather. His suit was perfectly tailored as always, his dark hair still neat, though thinner at the temples now. His jawline was sharp, but his shoulders carried a heaviness she had never seen before. For a moment, the noise of the wedding dulled around her. The clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, the faint laughter of guests, it all faded into silence. She felt her chest tighten. Memories flooded uninvited. The first time she saw him at a conference, standing behind a podium, commanding a crowd with the sharpness of his words. The way his hand used to feel warm and sure when it closed around hers. The promises whispered in the dark. And then the betrayal. The arguments. The slammed doors. The final papers signed with shaking hands. Years had passed, yet the wound seemed fresh at the sight of him. Mommy. Ethan tugged her hand, pulling her back to the present. His voice was soft but insistent. That man, his finger pointed straight at Alexander. He looks like Daddy. Amelia froze. The words pierced her like lightning, raw and merciless. Before she could stop him, Ethan slipped from her grasp and began walking, no running, toward Alexander. Daddy. The sound was loud enough to cut through the air, loud enough for people nearby to turn, their conversations pausing as they looked. Alexander's head, which had been bent slightly as though lost in thought, snapped up. His dark eyes, those same stormy eyes that once held her world inside them, found the little boy racing toward him. And then his gaze lifted further, past Ethan, past the crowd, to her. For the briefest moment, Time stretched impossibly long. She stood rooted, unable to move, her breath trapped in her lungs. Shock spread across his face. A flicker of recognition, a flicker of pain, and then something else, something softer, like the cracking open of a long-buried hope. Ethan reached him, small hands gripping the armrest of the wheelchair. "Daddy, it's me," he said, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Mommy said you went away, but you're here. You're really here." Gasps whispered through the crowd. Heads turned. People exchanged glances. Whispers traveled quickly, the kind that weddings were famous for. Amelia wanted to vanish. Her face burned. Every nerve screamed at her to run, to scoop Ethan up, to shield him from the confusion unraveling. But her legs wouldn't obey. She was frozen, caught between the storm of the past and the silence of the present. Alexander looked at Ethan, his lips parting as though words had been stolen from him. Slowly, his trembling hand reached out, not quite touching, but hovering close. The muscles in his jaw tightened, his eyes suspiciously wet. Finally he spoke. His voice was rough, deeper than she remembered, but unmistakably his. The name was barely more than a whisper, but Amelia heard it, clear as thunder. The little boy nodded eagerly, his innocent face lighting up. "Yes, Ethan Carter. That's me. Carter. Amelia's last name. Not Hayes." The detail was small, but it landed sharp. Alexander's eyes darted back to hers, locking across the distance. The silence between them was heavier than the Texas air. Guests shifted in their seats, unsure if they were witnessing a scene of reunion or scandal. The bride's music faltered, a violinist missing a note before quickly recovering. Alexander's lips moved again, the words this time directed at her. "Amelia?" Her name and his voice, after all these years, felt like a blade sliding against old scars. Amelia's knees threatened to give way. Her pulse hammered. Her heart told her to run. But her son stood there, looking between them with the expectant eyes of a child desperate for connection. There was no escaping. Not anymore. The storm she had avoided for years had found her, right here, in the middle of a Texas wedding. And nothing would ever be the same again. The wedding music swelled again, pulling the guests' attention back to the ceremony. Amelia sat rigid in her chair, though she remembered almost nothing of the vows being spoken beneath the flowered arch. Her mind was elsewhere, dragged backward into time. The sound of Alexander's voice saying her name still reverberated in her chest. She closed her eyes briefly, fighting back the rush of memories that came with it. She had promised herself she would never go back there. And yet, here she was, helpless as the past unfolded before her. 7 years earlier, Houston shimmered under a late summer heat, the glass towers downtown catching fire from the setting sun. Amelia was 23 then, freshly graduated, filled with the hopeful stubbornness of a young woman determined to carve out her own path. She had been working as an event assistant for a corporate gala, one of those glittering evenings where money and power mingled beneath chandeliers. Her dress that night had not been bought. It was borrowed from her cousin, a size too big at the shoulders, pinned with quiet desperation in the bathroom mirror. Amelia had not expected to meet anyone, let alone the man who would one day undo and remake her world. Alexander Hayes. He had entered the ballroom with a presence that silenced air. Heads turned. Murmurs followed. At 31, he was already the CEO of Hayes International Holdings, one of the fastest-growing energy firms in Texas. His reputation was both dazzling and ruthless, a self-made billionaire with no patience for mediocrity. But Amelia hadn't known all that when he first crossed the room toward her. All she had seen was the sharp cut of his suit, the quiet intensity of his eyes, the way his smile was small but sincere when he said, "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." She had laughed, startled, clutching her clipboard tighter. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who remembers what it feels like, he replied, his voice smooth, edged with curiosity. And just like that, the conversation began. She had been nervous, stumbling over her words at first, but Alexander had a way of drawing people out. He asked questions and actually listened, his gaze unwavering, as though the rest of the room didn't exist. By the time the gala ended, Amelia's cheeks ached from smiling, and she left with a memory she replayed for weeks afterward. His hand brushing hers as he helped her with her coat, his low voice saying, "I hope tonight isn't the last time we meet." Their first date was not extravagant, though he could have easily afforded it. Instead, Alexander took her to a little jazz club tucked between two aging brick buildings, a place his mother had once loved. The air smelled of old wood and whiskey, the stage lit in soft blue. As the saxophone played, Alexander leaned in close, his cologne warm and clean, his words threaded with both charm and earnestness. "You don't belong in the background, Amelia," he told her, his eyes intent. "You have too much fire for that." She had flushed, laughing it off. "And you think you know me that well already?" He only smiled. "I want to." Nights turned into weeks, weeks into months. Their love grew in layers. Stolen kisses on rain-slick sidewalks, long conversations that stretched past midnight, hands held tightly during drives across endless Texas highways. He bought her books, remembering every author she mentioned in passing. She cooked him her grandmother's recipes, teaching him that food could be more than fuel. He told her about his childhood, a father who had left, a mother who worked herself sick, a boy who built walls out of survival. And she, in turn, told him about her dreams of becoming a writer, of crafting stories that made people feel less alone. They were different worlds colliding, the billionaire and the small-town girl. And yet it felt inevitable, like gravity pulling stars into orbit. It was on a spring evening at the very ranch where today's wedding was being held. The air smelled of mesquite and fresh earth. Fireflies danced among the tall grasses. Alexander had led her to the old oak tree at the edge of the field, the one carved with initials of lovers long gone. He knelt there in his perfectly pressed suit, holding out a ring that caught the moonlight. "Marry me, Amelia," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a rare vulnerability. "I can give you everything. Houses, cars, the world if you want it. But what I want most is to give you me. All of me." She had cried then, not because of a diamond, though it was beautiful, but because for once, the man who seemed unshakable looked fragile, human, hers. "Yes," she whispered, and the word had tasted like forever. Forever, however, had a way of breaking. The first year of marriage had been bliss. They traveled, they laughed, they dreamed. Ethan was born a year later, completing the picture she had once only dared to imagine. But success came with shadows. Alexander's company grew, swallowing more of his time, his energy, his presence. Nights grew long with him at the office, meetings in cities she had never seen, phone calls at hours when the baby cried and she faced it alone. She tried to understand, tried to remind herself that this was the man who had built everything from nothing, that ambition was in his blood. But distance became arguments. Arguments became silence. And then came the betrayal, not with another woman, but with neglect. The one promise he had made that broke her most. "You'll never feel alone again." Yet she did. Amelia blinked as the bride and groom kissed beneath the arch, the crowd cheering and clapping. She joined, and mechanically, her palms cold. But all she could feel was the weight of Alexander's gaze burning into her from across the lawn. And when Ethan turned in his lap, grinning up at him and saying, "Daddy, will you come sit with us?" Amelia knew the past she had buried was no longer buried at all. It was alive, and it was staring straight at her. The applause still echoed faintly across the ranch, the bride and groom disappearing into a shower of rose petals. Guests moved toward the reception tent, voices bright, laughter floating under the wide Texas sky. But Alexander Hayes remained seated near the aisle, unmoving. His wheelchair was angled slightly, his gaze fixed on the retreating figure of a woman he thought he would never see again. Amelia. Her name was a knife and a bomb all at once. The years had not dulled the way it struck him. Even from across the distance, he had seen the tremor in her hands, the way her lips parted in shock, the way she froze like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. And then there was the boy who had looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. His own eyes reflected back at him like a mirror. Daddy. The words still reverberated through Alexander's chest, breaking apart walls he had fortified for years. He had rehearsed 1,000 boardroom speeches, crushed rivals with his tongue as sharp as a blade. But in that moment, a 6-year-old's voice had left him powerless, stripped bare. It had been 2 years since the accident. 2 years since a stretch of black ice on a Dallas highway had stolen the use of his legs. 2 years since he'd woken up in a sterile hospital room with doctors explaining damage, surgery, rehabilitation. Words that blurred into noise while his world crumbled. At first, he fought it with the same fire that had built his empire. He poured money into specialists, demanded progress, forced his body through grueling therapy sessions. He refused to accept defeat, but reality was stubborn. His legs would not obey. The man who once commanded skyscrapers, who once walked with a stride that drew envy, now lived on wheels. The first months were filled with rage. Rage at fate, at himself, at the universe. Rage at the silence of the house that had once echoed with laughter. Rage at Amelia's absence, though he had no right to expect her. He had driven her away long before the accident, and beneath the rage was regret. So much regret. Alexander had built Hayes International into a fortress of glass and steel, but inside he was hollow. The business continued, the profit soared, but the man behind it had grown brittle. Nights stretched long and empty in the penthouse. The only voices he heard belonged to assistants, board members, and doctors. He had everything money could buy, yet nothing of what mattered. Sometimes he replayed their last argument in his mind, Amelia's voice shaking as she told him she couldn't live like this anymore. Her eyes bright with unshed tears, begging him to choose her, to choose their son, over endless meetings and deals. He had chosen wrong, and when she left, he told himself it was her weakness, not his. That lie sustained him for a while, until the accident stripped away pretense and left him face to face with truth. When Ethan ran to him and called him daddy, the world tilted. For a moment, Alexander couldn't breathe. He had wondered countless nights where his son was, what he looked like now, how his laugh sounded. He had pictured birthdays without him, milestones missed, questions left unanswered. And now here Ethan stood, real, alive, calling for the father who had never been there. The boy's small hand gripped the cold steel of the wheelchair, unbothered by what it meant. Innocence didn't see limitations. Innocence only saw love. "Daddy, will you come sit with us?" Ethan asked again, his hopeful voice slicing through Alexander's paralysis. Alexander's throat closed. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to roll across that lawn, take Amelia's hand, and sit beside them like a family again. But Amelia's eyes held him frozen. They were guarded, sharp-wounded. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, a silent plea. "Don't." So he swallowed the word. "Maybe later, son," he managed, his voice thick. The boy pouted but nodded, running back toward his mother. Amelia knelt, whispering something to him, smoothing his hair before guiding him toward the reception tent. Alexander watched them go, his heart a storm. For years, he had told himself it was too late, that she had moved on, that his chance was gone. But seeing her, seeing Ethan, cracked him open. For the first time in years, He felt the faint spark of something he thought he'd buried for good. Hope. As the wedding shifted to celebration, Alexander remained at the edge, the sounds of clinking glasses and music barely reaching him. His mind spun. Questions collided. Did Ethan know the truth? Had Amelia ever told him about his father? Did she hate him too much to allow it? And most terrifying of all, did she still feel anything at all? He gripped the arms of his wheelchair, his knuckles white. His empire meant nothing now. All his money, his reputation, his carefully constructed image. None of it could buy back what he had lost. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. He turned his gaze toward the reception tent, where laughter floated like music through the night. Somewhere in there, Amelia sat with their son. Somewhere in there, a chance at redemption lingered. Alexander Hayes was a man used to winning, but for the first time, he realized this was not a battle of business or power. This was a battle for forgiveness, for love, for family, and he didn't know if he was strong enough to fight it. The reception tent was alive with music. A country band strummed under strings of fairy lights, their rhythm mingling with the clatter of silverware and the low hum of voices. The scent of barbecued brisket and buttered cornbread hung thick in the Texas air. Guests crowded round long tables dressed in linen. Glasses of champagne lifted high. Children darted across the grass with sparklers, their laughter piercing the night like fireflies. And yet, for Amelia, none of it existed. Her heart had not stopped racing since Ethan's little voice had pierced the silence of the ceremony. She could still hear the echo of it. Daddy. The word had turned the world upside down. She sat stiff at the edge of one of the tables now, Ethan by her side, a plate of food untouched before her. Every nerve was raw. Every breath felt heavy. She could feel eyes on her. Old friends, curious strangers, even distant relatives of the bride. Whispers traveled like wildfire. That's Amelia, isn't it? Wasn't she married to? To Alexander Hayes, yes. And that boy. Spitting image of him. Amelia gripped her napkin until her knuckles turned white. She hated gossip. She hated being spectacle. But most of all, she hated the truth threaded through their whispers. She risked a glance across the lawn. Alexander had been moved closer to the tent, his wheelchair positioned at the edge of the dance floor. People greeted him with polite smiles, business acquaintances, old friends. But she noticed how quickly they drifted away. He was still the billionaire everyone recognized, but the chair cast a shadow. Pity clung to him like a second suit. And yet he looked regal. Even seated, his posture was proud, his presence undeniable. His dark suit cut sharply against the gleam of the lights, his expression unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed him, eyes that followed her, never wavering, never hiding. Ethan tugged at Amelia's arm. Mom, can I go dance with the other kids? She nodded absently, smoothing his shirt. Stay where I can see you. He dashed toward the little group twirling under the lights. For a brief moment, Amelia exhaled, but the relief was short-lived, because when she lifted her gaze, Alexander was there, rolling his chair closer. The distance between them shrank with every turn of the wheels. She wanted to stand and walk away, to shield herself from the inevitable. But her legs betrayed her, rooted to the ground. He stopped just across the table from her, his voice low, meant only for her. Amelia. Her name on his lips was both dagger and balm. She braced herself, folding her arms across her chest. You shouldn't be here, she whispered sharply, her eyes darting around to see who was watching. This isn't about me, he said, his tone even. I came for the bride. She's an old friend. I didn't know, he hesitated, his gaze flicking toward Ethan. I didn't know I'd see you. Amelia let out a bitter laugh. Texas is big, Alexander. Big enough that I never thought this moment would come. And yet here we are. Their eyes locked. Years of silence stretched between them, filled with all the words they'd never spoken. Why didn't you tell me? His voice cracked, quieter now raw. Her heart lurched, but she steadied herself. Tell you what, that he's mine. Amelia clenched her jaw. She had known this confrontation would come someday, but not here, not like this. You forfeited that right, she said, each word sharp as glass. You forfeited it the moment you chose your empire over your family. The moment you turned your back on me, on us. A shadow crossed his face. Amelia, no, she cut him off, her voice trembling with restrained fury. You don't get to play father now because you feel lonely in that chair. You don't get to rewrite history because regret finally caught up with you. His hand tightened on the armrest of his chair. You think that's what this is? Pity? Guilt, isn't it? The question hung between them like a blade. Nearby guests had begun to notice. A few heads turned, subtle but curious. Laughter at the far end of the tent dulled under the weight of tension radiating from their corner. Amelia's cheeks flushed hot. She hated the spectacle. Hated the way whispers curled in the air like smoke. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. I won't do this here, she hissed. Alexander looked up at her, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning. For a moment, she saw the man she once loved. Fierce, determined, unyielding. But now there was something else in him too. Vulnerability. Desperation. Then tell me when, he said softly. Tell me when I can explain. Tell me when I can fight for the son I never knew. For the woman I never stopped, he caught himself. The word lingering unsaid. Her pulse thundered. The air between them was suffocating. Don't, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't you dare say you never stopped loving me. His silence was louder than any confession. Mom. The small voice shattered the moment. Ethan ran back to her side, his cheeks flushed from dancing. He looked between his mother and the man in the wheelchair, confusion clouding his features. Why are you crying? He asked softly, tugging at her dress. Amelia blinked rapidly, brushing a hand across her eyes. I'm fine, sweetheart. But Alexander leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle. Your mom's the bravest woman I've ever known, Ethan. Don't ever forget that. Ethan smiled innocently, unaware of the storm swirling above him. Amelia's breath caught. Her chest ached. She wanted to hate Alexander for saying it, and yet part of her longed to believe it again. The music swelled, drowning out the whispers for now. But Amelia knew this was only the beginning. The past had found them, and the reckoning was far from over. The night pressed in around the reception tent, music weaving like a fragile thread holding together the fragments of the present. But in Amelia's mind, the past bled through unbidden, unstoppable. Every glance at Alexander drew her backward into the story she had tried for years to bury. She had been 22 the first time she met him, a new hire at Hayes International. Clutching a stack of resumes she was tasked to file, nerves eating at her confidence. The elevator doors had slid open on the top floor, and there he was, Alexander Hayes. Even then he was a legend. Barely 30, already a CEO who had built a company from nothing. A man whose face appeared on the covers of Forbes and Fortune. His name carried weight in business circles like thunder before storm. But in person, he was something else. Tall, commanding. His presence filled the space effortlessly. Dark hair, sharp suit, eyes that pierced through pretense. He had looked at her, really looked, in a way no one had before. You're new, he had said, his voice deep, threaded with a confidence that both intimidated and thrilled her. She had nodded, cheeks burning. First week. He had smiled then, not the polished smile he gave investors or the press, but something real, warm. Welcome, he'd said. This place can chew people up. Don't let it. It was only a handful of words, but Amelia had carried them with her all day, and into the weeks that followed. Their paths crossed more than once after that. A late-night project where she stayed behind to finish proposal, only to find him working just as late. A charity gala where he caught her struggling with a tray of champagne flutes and effortlessly relieved her of the burden. Every encounter left a mark. He was brilliant, relentless, magnetic. He spoke with vision, with fire. And when his gaze landed on her, she felt seen in a way that both terrified and thrilled her. Against her better judgment, she let herself be drawn in. And one night, after too many stolen glances and lingering touches, the line between professional and personal shattered. Dinner turned into laughter. Laughter into a walk along the city lights. The walk into a kiss that stole her breath and rewrote her future. Loving Alexander was like standing in the eye of a hurricane. He swept her into his world of power and wealth. Private jets, glittering galas, penthouses with views that stretched to the horizon. She traveled to places she'd only dreamed of, dined at tables where senators and billionaires traded words. But beneath the glitter, there was something raw. When the world turned its back, when the cameras stopped flashing, Alexander let her see the man beneath the empire. The orphan boy who had clawed his way from nothing, who had built walls around his heart so no one could ever hurt him again. He let her in. For a time, she believed she was enough to keep him whole. But the empire never slept. Board meetings bled into dinners. Phone calls interrupted quiet evenings. His laptop became a third presence in their bed. Amelia tried to understand, tried to be patient. She reminded herself of his dreams, of the boy who had once been hungry for more than life had given him. But patience grew thin when nights passed without him home, when promises to take a break turned to ash. The fights began softly at first. "You said tonight was for us." "I know, Amelia, but this deal changes everything." Then sharper. "You missed his first steps." "I was closing a deal that pays for his future." And finally explosive. "You're not building a life, Alexander. You're building a prison. And you don't understand what it takes to keep all of this alive." The night it ended was burned into her memory. Rain hammered against the windows of their penthouse, a storm echoing the one inside their home. Amelia stood in the living room, her voice hoarse from shouting, her arms trembling as she held Ethan, barely a year old then, against her chest. "I can't do this anymore," she had said, her voice breaking. "I won't raise him like this, Alexander. Not with a father who's a ghost in his own home." He had stood there, soaked from the rain, his jaw tight, his eyes stormy. For once, he didn't fight. He didn't beg. He just let silence stretch between them, his pride heavier than his love. "Do what you think you need to," he had said finally, his voice cold, final. And she had walked away that night, her heart in shreds, her baby in her arms. Now, years later, sitting under the wedding tent with the same man only a few steps away, Amelia felt the old wounds tear open. She had loved him once with everything in her. She had built a life around that love, only to watch it crumble beneath the weight of his ambition. And seeing him here, broken yet still burning with the fire she once knew, left her shaking. Because part of her hated him still, and part of her wasn't sure she ever stopped loving him. The wedding had ended hours ago, but Amelia lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her modest Texas home. The house was quiet, except for the soft rhythm of Ethan's breathing from the room next door. He had fallen asleep easily, blissfully unaware of the storm his innocent words had stirred. "Daddy." 2 syllables that had cracked open a world she thought she had sealed forever. She turned onto her side, clutching the pillow, trying to will her body into stillness. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. Alexander, the man who had once been her everything, her love, her anchor, her undoing. The same man now confined to a wheelchair, looking at their son with a mixture of awe, longing, and pain. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair that after years of struggle, of scraping a life together with her own hands, he could show up like this, broken, yet still holding the power to unravel her with just a look. And yet, beneath her anger, something deeper stirred. A dangerous softness. Because despite the years, despite the heartbreak, part of her still remembered the man who had once held her hand under the glow of city lights and whispered dreams into her ear. That man had existed once. The question was, had he survived? Across town in his penthouse suite at a luxury hotel, Alexander Hayes sat alone. The reception had ended, the guests gone, but his mind refused rest. The image of Ethan, his son, lingered like a brand on his soul. The boy's wide eyes, the innocent joy in his voice, the simple, unquestioning claim, "Daddy." It should have filled him with pride, with joy, and it did in a way, but beneath it all lay the heavy weight of shame. He had missed it all. The first steps, the first words, birthdays, bedtime stories, every small, irreplaceable moment of a life he should have been there to cherish. And Amelia, the years had only deepened her beauty. Not just the curve of her face or the fire in her eyes, but the strength she carried in every line, every gesture. She had survived without him, thrived even. That realization cut deeper than any business loss, any physical pain. For the first time in years, Alexander felt powerless. Not because of the wheelchair, not because of the accident that had stolen his mobility, but because he wasn't sure he deserved to be in their lives again. He wheeled himself to the window, the city stretching before him in glittering silence. Once, this view had given him pride, proof of what he had built, what he had conquered. Tonight, it only reminded him of emptiness. He remembered the night she left, the sound of the door closing, the silence that followed. He had told himself it was her choice, her weakness, her failure to understand his vision. But deep down, he had known the truth even then. It had been him, his pride, his obsession with control, his inability to choose love over ambition. And now, years later, fate had placed her before him again, along with a son who carried his eyes, his blood, his future. The question burned. Was this a second chance or a punishment? Back in her bedroom, Amelia finally sat up, defeated by restlessness. She wrapped a robe around herself and moved to the kitchen, pouring a glass of water. The silence pressed heavy. She hated that he still had this effect on her, hated that the sight of him, vulnerable human, had cracked her defenses. "Don't be fool," she whispered to herself. She had built a life without him. She didn't need his money, his empire, his world. She had Ethan, and that was enough. And yet, her mind betrayed her, replaying the way Alexander had looked at their son. The unguarded awe, the raw emotion in his eyes. It wasn't the look of a man indifferent. It was the look of a father who had been starving without knowing it. And worse, it was the look of the man she had once loved, the one she had thought was gone forever. As dawn began to creep across the horizon, Alexander wheeled himself back from the window. He had spent years mastering deals, toppling rivals, building an empire. He had faced lawsuits, betrayals, even the accident that had left him broken in body. But nothing terrified him as much as facing Amelia again. Still, he knew one thing with a certainty that cut through every doubt. He couldn't let her slip away this time. Not her, not their son, not the second chance fate had thrown into his lap. For the first time in years, Alexander Hayes made a vow not for his company, not for his ambition, but for love. He would fight, not with contracts or money, but with truth, humility, and whatever scraps of his heart he still had left. Because if there was even the smallest chance of winning her back, he had to take it. The Texas sun was already high when Amelia pulled into the driveway of her small white brick home. Ethan hummed in the back seat, clutching the toy cowboy he had caught at the wedding reception, blissfully unaware of the storm still raging in his mother's chest. Amelia turned off the engine and sat still for a moment, fingers gripping the steering wheel. She had spent the entire night convincing herself that the past belonged exactly where it was, in the past. She would not allow Alexander Hayes to uproot the fragile peace she had built. But fate had a cruel way of laughing at resolve. As she stepped out of the car, helping Ethan down with his backpack, she froze. There, parked on the quiet street in front of her house, was a sleek, black car. A driver stood at attention beside it. And in the back seat she saw him, Alexander. Her heart plummeted into her stomach. "Mom?" Ethan tugged at her hand. "That's Daddy's car." Her throat tightened. "No, sweetheart. That's..." Before she could finish, the back door opened, and Alexander emerged, slowly, carefully. He maneuvered his chair onto the pavement, his movements practiced but deliberate. The driver stepped back, giving him space. The sight of him outside her home felt surreal, invasive, like a memory intruding into her present life. "Amelia," he said softly, his voice carrying across the short distance. "Ethan." Ethan's face lit up. Without hesitation, he ran forward. "Daddy." Amelia's heart clenched as Alexander opened his arms, awkwardly but eagerly, catching the boy against his chest. The look on his face, pure joy, unfiltered awe, made something inside her break all over again. When Ethan finally pulled away, babbling about his toy hat and the wedding cake, Amelia stepped forward, her voice sharp. "You shouldn't be here." Alexander met her eyes. No arrogance, no CEO steel. Just quiet sincerity. "I know, but I had to see you. Both of you." Her pulse raced. "You can't just show up like this. This is my home, Alexander. My life. You don't get to walk back into it like nothing happened." "I'm not pretending nothing happened," he said, his tone low, steady. "I remember everything. Every fight, every silence, every mistake." He paused, his voice roughening. "And I remember the night you walked away. I've lived with that every day since." The words disarmed her more than she wanted to admit, but she straightened her shoulders, forcing steel into her spine. "You made your choices. You chose work, ambition, pride over us. I won't let you hurt Ethan the way you hurt me." At that, Alexander's expression shifted, pain flickering across his face. "I never knew about him," he said quietly, glancing at Ethan, who was now happily playing with his toy on the front steps. "Amelia, if I had known..." Her breath caught. The truth was undeniable. She had never told him. Alexander wheeled closer, his voice dropping. "I don't want to disrupt your life, but I can't ignore him. He's my son, and I need to be part of his world, even if I don't deserve it." The rawness in his tone cut through her defenses like a blade. This wasn't the commanding billionaire CEO she remembered. This was a man stripped bare, begging not for power, not for control, but for his child. Amelia felt her throat tighten. She had spent years convincing herself Ethan didn't need a father, that she was enough. But seeing Ethan's joy, the way he had run to Alexander without hesitation, unsettled that belief. Still, she couldn't give in. Not yet. "Being a father isn't about showing up when it's convenient," she said, her voice trembling. "It's about being there through everything. Where were you when he was sick with fever at midnight? When he took his first steps? When he asked me why he didn't have a daddy like the other kids?" Alexander closed his eyes briefly, pain etching into his features. "I wasn't there, and nothing I say can change that. But I'm here now. I want to make it right." Amelia crossed her arms, trying to steady herself. "This isn't something we decide on the doorstep. You can't just step into his life." "Then let me prove it," Alexander said, determination flickering beneath the humility. "One step at a time. No demands, no expectations. Just let me show him, and you, that I can be more than the man I was." Her chest tightened. For a moment, she saw the boyish charm in him again, the same man who had once made her believe in forever. She shook her head quickly, forcing the thought away. "I don't know if I can trust you, Alexander." And trust is the one thing Ethan can't afford to lose. He didn't argue, didn't push. He just nodded, his voice quiet but resolute. Then let me earn it back. At that moment, Ethan ran back to them, holding his toy hat above his head. Daddy, look. I'm a cowboy, he said, grinning wide. Alexander's face softened, his eyes shining with something Amelia hadn't seen in years. Love, pure, unguarded love. He reached out, ruffling Ethan's hair with a trembling hand. The best cowboy I've ever seen. Amelia's breath caught as she watched them. For years she had carried the burden alone, believing she could shield Ethan from the ache of absence. But seeing them together, she wasn't sure if she had been protecting her son or protecting herself. The sun beat down, the silence between them heavy. Finally, Amelia sighed, her voice low. You can come by tomorrow, for an hour. No promises, no guarantees, just an hour. Alexander looked at her, something like hope sparking in his eyes. Thank you, he said simply. As he wheeled back toward his car, Ethan skipping beside him, Amelia stood frozen. Her heart was a battlefield, love, anger, fear, and something dangerous stirring beneath it all. Because, for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to keep the walls standing. The next afternoon, the sun spilled golden light across the modest yard behind Amelia's house. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and blooming wildflowers. Amelia stood at the kitchen window, her heart in her throat, as she watched Alexander's sleek black car pull up once again. He emerged slowly, his driver steadying the chair until he maneuvered himself onto the sidewalk. He looked out of place in his tailored charcoal suit, too polished for the worn fences and simple garden Amelia had worked hard to maintain. Yet there was something different in his demeanor, less commanding, more cautious, as though he were stepping into sacred ground. Daddy, Ethan bolted out the back door, his small sneakers thudding against the porch steps as he raced across the grass. Amelia clenched her jaw, bracing for disappointment. But when Alexander bent forward, catching Ethan in an embrace that looked both awkward and desperate, something inside her cracked. Did you bring it? Ethan asked breathlessly, eyes wide. Alexander smiled faintly, reaching into the leather satchel hooked onto the side of his chair. Of course I did. He pulled out a toy sheriff's badge, shiny and golden, handing it to his son. Ethan's squeal of delight filled the air. Now you're Sheriff Ethan, Alexander said, fastening the badge onto the boy's shirt pocket. And I'm your deputy. Amelia's chest tightened as she stepped outside, standing with her arms crossed. Ethan had always loved cowboy stories, and here Alexander was, sliding effortlessly into a role she had never been able to fill. Deputies can't use wheelchairs, Ethan declared matter-of-factly. Alexander didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned closer, eyes twinkling. Who says? A deputy's strength comes from his mind and his heart, and I have plenty of both. Ethan studied him for a moment, then grinned. Okay, you can be my deputy. Amelia's throat burned as she watched her son accept the father he had never known with such ease. For the next half hour, Ethan led Alexander around the yard, pretending to chase bandits, pointing sticks like rifles, and demanding that his deputy follow along. Alexander tried and failed to keep up. His wheelchair got caught in the grass once, and Amelia instinctively rushed forward, ready to intervene. But before she could, Alexander laughed. Looks like the bandits outsmarted me, he said, shaking his head. Ethan raced back to him, puffing out his chest proudly. Don't worry, Deputy Daddy. I'll save you. He pretended to lasso his father, tugging at an imaginary rope until Alexander played along, throwing his hands up in mock surrender. Amelia froze at the sound of Ethan's words. Deputy Daddy. The name sliced through her resolve. She had guarded Ethan from Alexander's shadow all these years, convinced she was sparing him pain. But the boy wasn't confused. He wasn't afraid. He was simply happy. and that terrified her. When Ethan finally collapsed into the grass, breathless and giggling, Amelia brought out lemonade and sandwiches. She placed a glass in front of Alexander, her movements stiff. "Thank you," he murmured, his gaze meeting hers for a fleeting second. She sat on the porch steps, keeping her distance as Ethan eagerly recounted every detail of their cowboy game. Alexander listened intently, nodding, asking questions, his attention fixed entirely on the boy. Amelia watched, her chest tightening. For years, she had painted Alexander in her mind as cold, selfish, unreachable. But the man sitting in her yard now, leaning forward, eyes alive with wonder, was not the man she remembered. When the driver appeared at the gate to signal the hour was nearly over, Ethan's face fell. "Already," he whined. "But we were going to catch the last bandit." Alexander reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll catch him next time. Sheriff's promise." "Tomorrow?" Ethan asked eagerly. Amelia stiffened, ready to shut it down. But Alexander didn't look at her. He looked at his son. "Only if your mom says yes," he said quietly. Ethan turned, his big eyes pleading with Amelia. Her heart lurched. This was the moment she had dreaded, the wedge of hope driven between them. "Tomorrow might not work," she said carefully, her voice even. "But we'll see." Ethan groaned, but Alexander gave him a small smile. "Even deputies have to be patient sometimes," he said. The boy nodded reluctantly, hugging him once more before running inside with the sheriff's badge. Amelia followed Alexander as he wheeled toward the car. "You're making this harder," she said quietly, her voice laced with frustration. "I don't want to make it harder," he replied, his tone steady. "I just want to be here. For him. For you." She shook her head, anger rising. "Don't say that. Don't act like you're suddenly ready to be the man I begged you to be years ago." He met her gaze, his expression stripped of pride. "Because I wasn't ready then. But I am now, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it if you let me." Her breath caught. She wanted to scream at him, to push him away, but instead, she whispered the only truth she could manage. "I don't know if I can let you." Alexander's eyes softened. "Then let me give you reasons to try." With that, he wheeled himself into the car, leaving Amelia standing in the doorway of the life she had worked so hard to protect. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure if she wanted those walls to stay standing. The evening air was heavy with cicadas as Amelia sat on her porch, arms folded around herself. Ethan was fast asleep inside, his sheriff's badge pinned proudly to his pajama top. Her thoughts were a storm. She had spent years hating Alexander Hayes, burying the memories of his arrogance, his neglect, his relentless pursuit of success. Yet now, the image that haunted her wasn't the ruthless CEO she had left behind. It was the man laughing in her backyard, his wheelchair sinking slightly into the grass as Ethan declared him Deputy Daddy. Amelia pressed her hands against her temples. "Don't do this," she whispered to herself. "Don't let him in again." The sound of tires crunching gravel broke her thoughts. A familiar car pulled up, and out stepped her younger sister, Claire, with her arms crossed and her expression sharp. "You didn't answer my calls," Claire said, walking up the porch steps. Amelia sighed. "I was putting Ethan to bed." Claire leaned against the railing, studying her. "I heard from someone at the wedding. He's back." Amelia's stomach tightened. Word travels fast. "Too fast," Claire shot back. "Amelia, please tell me you're not even considering letting Alexander back into your life. That man broke you. I remember the nights you cried yourself to sleep, the way you packed your bags with shaking hands. And now he just shows up in a wheelchair, and suddenly you're supposed to forgive him." Her voice trembled, sharper than Amelia expected. "You think I don't remember?" Amelia whispered. "You think I've forgotten what he did? I haven't. I never will." "Then why are you letting him near Ethan?" Claire pressed. "You've kept him safe all these years." Don't let Alexander's regret rewrite history. Amelia swallowed hard, her chest burning. It's not that simple. Ethan. He looked at him like he had been waiting his whole life to meet him. What am I supposed to do? Pretend Alexander doesn't exist when Ethan has already claimed him as his father. Claire softened, but her tone remained firm. Then you need to know what he's hiding. Men like Alexander don't change overnight. If he wants back into your lives, he owes you the truth, all of it. The next afternoon, Amelia agreed to meet Alexander at a quiet cafe tucked into the edge of town. She left Ethan with Claire, a decision that felt both protective and necessary. When she walked in, Alexander was already seated near the window, his hands resting on the table, gaze distant. "You came," he said softly as she slid into the chair across from him. "I came for answers," Amelia replied. "If you're serious about wanting to be in Ethan's life, then you need to stop hiding. Tell me everything. No excuses. No lies." Alexander's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to his hands. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then slowly he began. "It wasn't just an accident," Alexander said finally, his voice low. "Not the way people think. I didn't fall or crash a car or slip on wet pavement. I was pushed." Amelia's breath caught. "What?" He nodded grimly. "Someone wanted me gone. Someone inside my company. There were whispers for months. Board members who thought I was too controlling. Investors who wanted me out. I ignored it. I thought I was untouchable. And one night, after a late meeting, it happened. His fingers curled against the table. I woke up in a hospital bed, unable to move my legs. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. My so-called colleagues told me to step down. In a single night, I lost everything. My power, my mobility, my company. Amelia stared at him, her heart racing. She had expected guilt, excuses, maybe even tears. But this betrayal, sabotage, ruin, was something she hadn't imagined. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she asked softly. "Because pride is a cruel master," he said bitterly. "I couldn't face the world broken. I couldn't face you. Not after the way I let you down. I thought maybe I deserved it." Her throat tightened. For years, she had painted him as the villain in her story. But now, sitting across from him, she saw not a monster, but a man scarred by choices and consequences. Some his own, some forced upon him. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you let me try," he murmured. His eyes glistened. The steel walls she remembered gone. "Not for me. For Ethan. For the boy who deserves to know his father. For the woman I lost and can't stop loving." Amelia's chest ached. She wanted to believe him, to let herself lean into the hope that flickered dangerously in his eyes. But Claire's warning rang in her ears. "Don't let regret rewrite history." "Alexander," she exhaled slowly, fighting the tremor in her voice. "This doesn't erase the years you weren't there. It doesn't erase the nights I held our son and wondered how to tell him why his father wasn't coming home." "I know," he said hoarsely, "but maybe it can be the start of something new. Please, Amelia, let me prove I can be the man you both need." Amelia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Every word he had spoken clawed at the walls she had built, threatening to tear them down. "I need time," she said finally, her voice sharp with restraint. "If you're serious, you'll give me that. No pressure. No promises." Alexander nodded slowly, his face shadowed with both relief and sorrow. "As much time as you need," he whispered. Amelia walked out of the cafe, her hands trembling, her heart split between fear and hope. And for the first time in years, she realized that her story with Alexander wasn't finished. Not yet. The autumn fair had come to the small Texas town, filling the air with the smell of roasted corn, cotton candy, and sizzling barbecue. The square was alive with music and laughter, lights strung across old brick buildings, twinkling like stars. Amelia walked hand in hand with Ethan, her heart still heavy with the conversation she'd had with Alexander days earlier. Since then, he had kept his word. No calls, no unexpected visits, no pressure. And somehow, that silence spoke louder than his pleas ever could. Ethan tugged her sleeve, his little cowboy boots kicking up dust. "Mama, can we ride the Ferris wheel?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe after we get some funnel cake." But before they could take 2 steps, Ethan gasped. "Daddy?" Amelia froze. Alexander Hayes was there, across the square, his wheelchair rolling slowly over uneven cobblestones, his sharp suit replaced with a simple button-down shirt and jeans. For the first time in years, he looked less like a CEO and more like a man simply trying to belong. Ethan ran to him before Amelia could react. Alexander bent forward, arms opening instinctively. The boy barreled into him, laughter echoing as Alexander lifted him onto his lap with practiced ease. "Deputy Daddy made it." Ethan beamed, proudly flashing the toy badge pinned to his chest. Amelia's breath caught. For a moment the crowd faded, the lights dimmed, and all she saw was the man she once loved holding the son he never knew. The fair was bustling, children darting between booths, music swelling from the bandstand. Amelia had just started toward them when a sudden commotion rippled through the crowd. A spooked horse, part of a carriage ride, broke free of its handler, hooves clattering against the pavement as it bolted down the street. People screamed, scattering in panic. Amelia's blood turned to ice. Ethan, still perched on Alexander's lap, was directly in the path of the runaway animal. "Ethan!" she cried, shoving through the crowd. But Alexander had already moved. His wheelchair spun with startling precision as he yanked Ethan into his arms and angled sharply toward the curb. The beast thundered past, the rush of air whipping Amelia's hair as she reached them. Alexander shielded Ethan with his own body, his chair tipping dangerously as the horse barely missed them. The world went still again, the chaos fading into the gasps of bystanders. Ethan clung to his father, eyes wide. "Daddy, you saved me." Amelia dropped to her knees beside them, heart pounding. She touched Ethan's face, then looked up at Alexander. His expression was raw. No arrogance, no mask. Only the unfiltered terror of nearly losing the boy he had just begun to know. "Are you okay?" she asked breathlessly. He nodded, though his hands trembled as he held Ethan close. "I'd die before I let anything happen to him." Something broke inside Amelia, then not in pain, but in surrender. For years she had doubted him, feared his selfishness, resented his absence. But in this moment, with her son safe in his arms, she saw the truth. Alexander wasn't the man he had been. He was something more. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep in his cowboy pajamas, Amelia found Alexander waiting outside her house. The porch light cast him in gold, his eyes searching hers as though bracing for rejection. "You don't have to say anything," he began. "I just needed you to know. I would give everything I have left for him. For you." Amelia stepped closer, her throat tight. "For years I thought I hated you. I told myself I moved on, that I didn't need you. But when I saw you today, risking everything to protect our son," her voice broke, "I realized I never stopped loving you. I was just afraid." Alexander's breath hitched, his hands gripping his chair as though to steady himself. "Amelia," she knelt in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "No more fear, no more running. If you're ready to fight for us, really fight, then I'm ready too." For the first time in years, Alexander Hayes let the tears fall. He reached for her, and she leaned in, their kiss sealing the promise neither of them had dared to dream of. Months later, the three of them stood together at the edge of their property as the sun set over the Texas fields. Ethan raced ahead with a kite, his laughter carried on the wind. Alexander sat beside Amelia, his wheelchair replaced occasionally with leg braces and therapy sessions that gave him hope of standing again one day. But even if he never walked another step, he had found something far greater than mobility. He had found home. Amelia rested her hand over his. "We lost so many years," she whispered. He kissed her knuckles, his voice steady. "But we have the rest of our lives to make up for them." And as the sky blazed with color, Amelia knew the truth. Love wasn't about perfection or power. It was about forgiveness, resilience, and choosing every single day to begin again.